It doesn't feel like rebellion. It feels like relief. The moment you realize you broke the seal in your family, there's no explosion, there's a quiet internal release, as if something that had been held under pressure for generations finally found a way to breathe. You didn't shatter anything violently. You opened what had been locked for so long that people forgot it was ever closed. You've sensed this from early on. The unspoken rules, the invisible limits around what could be felt, said, or questioned. Certain emotions were allowed. Others were buried. Certain paths were praised. Others were quietly discouraged. No one called it a seal, but you felt its presence every time truth was softened to keep peace, every time pain was normalized instead of healed. A seal isn't a curse. It's a survival mechanism. Families create them when something is too heavy to process all at once. Trauma, shame, silence, sacrifice. These things don't disappear. They get contained, passed down as patterns instead of stories. You inherited those patterns, but unlike others, you didn't mistake containment for truth. You were the one who felt it first. The tension that didn't belong to the present moment. The emotional weight that arrived without a clear cause. You noticed reactions that felt older than the situation demanded. You asked questions others avoided, not to provoke, but to understand. And every time you did, the seal weakened slightly. Breaking the seal didn't mean confronting anyone directly. It meant refusing to carry what wasn't yours unconsciously. It meant feeling emotions fully instead of compressing them, naming discomfort instead of translating it into duty, choosing awareness where previous generations chose endurance. That choice alone changed the structure. You may remember how this made you feel different, sometimes isolated, sometimes misunderstood. You were called sensitive, difficult, dramatic, or too much. But what you were actually doing was interrupting inheritance. You stopped the automatic transfer of unprocessed history. That interruption always feels like disruption before it feels like healing. The seal broke internally before it ever showed externally. The moment you realized, this doesn't end with me, something shifted. You didn't reject your family. You didn't betray loyalty. You expanded it. You allowed truth to move where silence once ruled. And once truth moves, it doesn't need permission to continue. This is why your life may feel heavier and clearer at the same time. You're holding awareness others never had access to. Awareness costs energy, but it also frees it. You're no longer living inside reactions you can't explain. You're seeing patterns as patterns, not destiny. That distinction changes everything. The fire in this story isn't destruction. It's illumination. Fire reveals what was sealed not to punish, but to transform. You didn't break the seal to burn the past. You broke it so the future wouldn't have to carry it intact. And now that the seal has been opened, something irreversible has begun. Not chaos, but movement. Not blame, but clarity. The family story didn't end. It unlocked. Once the seal breaks, the first thing you notice is not change in others, but change in yourself. Your reactions slow. Old triggers lose their authority. Situations that once pulled you into confusion now reveal their structure. You're no longer inside the pattern, you're looking at it. That shift alone alters the entire system, even if no one acknowledges it yet. You may feel a strange sense of guilt at this stage. Not because you did something wrong, but because stepping out of inherited roles feels like abandonment at first. You were trained, implicitly, to hold things together by absorbing tension. When you stop absorbing, the system notices the absence. Silence becomes audible. Emotions surface without their usual container. This is often mistaken for instability, but it's actually rebalancing. Breaking the seal doesn't make you the cause of disruption. It makes you the point where truth can finally circulate. What others experience as discomfort is the nervous system adjusting to honesty. For generations, equilibrium was maintained by compression. You introduced expansion. Expansion always feels like loss before it feels like freedom. You may observe how family dynamics subtly rearrange around you. Some people become defensive. Others grow curious. Some withdraw. Others lean closer. None of these reactions are your responsibility to manage. They're responses to a structure changing shape. When one person stops playing their assigned role unconsciously, the entire system must renegotiate itself. This is where your strength matters most. Not the strength to confront, but the strength to remain steady. To avoid rushing in to fix what surfaces. To resist explaining yourself into acceptability. You didn't break the seal to become a mediator or savior. You broke it by refusing to carry distortion silently. That refusal is enough. You might notice how your internal language changes. You stop saying, "This is just how it is," and start saying, "This is how it became." That shift from inevitability to history is powerful. It turns fate into pattern. And patterns can be interrupted. You don't need everyone to agree with this perspective for it to be real. You only need to live from it consistently. There may be moments when the weight feels heavier than before. That doesn't mean you made a mistake. Awareness often increases sensation before it releases it. You're feeling what was always there, without the numbing layer of denial. This phase is temporary but formative. It teaches you how to hold truth without collapsing into it. Fire, in this story, continues to do its work quietly. It doesn't rage. It warms what was frozen. It brings flexibility back to places that were rigid. You don't have to aim it. You don't have to control it. Your presence, clear, honest, regulated, is the flame. The seal didn't break to create conflict. It broke to allow movement. And movement, once restored, begins to reorganize everything it touches. The next part will go deeper into what happens when awareness becomes irreversible, when you realize there is no going back to unconscious loyalty, even if part of you wishes there were. Irreversibility is the quiet threshold you don't notice until you've crossed it. One day you realize you can't unknow what you know. You can't step back into the old agreements that kept everything stable by staying unspoken. Even if you wanted to return to how it was, your body wouldn't cooperate. Awareness has altered your posture inside the family system, and posture, once changed, changes everything else. You may feel this most clearly in moments of pressure. Where you once automatically absorbed tension, you now pause. Where you once smoothed over discomfort, you now allow it to exist without translation. This doesn't make you cold. It makes you accurate. Accuracy is disruptive to systems built on emotional automation. Not because it attacks them, but because it refuses to participate in distortion. There's often grief here. Not dramatic grief, but a subtle mourning for the ease of unconscious belonging. When you were part of the seal, you didn't have to think. Roles told you who to be. Silence told you what not to touch. Breaking the seal gave you freedom, but it also removed the shelter of not knowing. Freedom carries responsibility, and responsibility can feel lonely before it feels right. You might notice an inner conflict emerge, a desire to protect others from pain while knowing that protection was the very thing that kept pain alive. This is where many people retreat. You didn't. You learned to distinguish between compassion and containment. Compassion allows feeling. Containment suppresses it. You chose the former, even when it meant being misunderstood. Your nervous system is adapting to this new role. It's learning that you don't have to regulate everyone else to remain safe. That safety can come from boundaries instead of self-erasure. This recalibration takes time. Some days feel grounded. Others feel raw. Both are part of integration. You're not destabilizing, you're repatterning. You may observe how old stories lose their grip on you. Narratives that once justified harm now sound thin. Excuses framed as tradition no longer persuade you. This doesn't make you disrespectful. It makes you discerning. You're not rejecting your lineage. You're updating it by refusing to pass forward what was never healed. At this stage, others may try to pull you back into the seal. Not maliciously, reflexively. Systems seek equilibrium. When one element changes, pressure increases to restore the old balance. You feel this as guilt, obligation, or subtle emotional leverage. Recognizing this pressure is crucial. Responding to it by shrinking would reseal what you already opened. Blessed by His grace? Click Super Thank You and give $20 to spread His light. Your gift plants seeds that grow His kingdom. Be the blessing. Instead, you learn a quieter skill, non-participation. You don't argue. You don't justify. You simply remain as you are, clear, present, uncompressed. This alone prevents the seal from reforming. Fire doesn't need to spread to change a room. It only needs to stay lit. This is the moment where your role becomes unmistakable, even if unnamed. You are no longer just a member of the family pattern. You are a point of interruption, a place where history pauses long enough to be examined. That pause is uncomfortable, but it's also where healing becomes possible. There is no return to innocence here. But there is something better, choice. You can choose how much you carry. You can choose what ends with you. You can choose not to confuse loyalty with silence ever again. The next part will move into what happens when others begin to sense this shift, when the seal is broken not just internally, but relationally, and how you stay steady without becoming the center of the storm. When the shift becomes relational, it no longer lives only inside you. Others begin to feel it without being able to name it. Conversations change tone. Old dynamics don't land the way they used to. You're still present, still connected, but something essential is different. The seal is no longer holding pressure the way it once did, and everyone senses the redistribution. This is often where projection appears. Not accusation outright, but implication. You may be framed as distant, changed, or difficult to read. The system looks for a reason because systems need explanations when equilibrium shifts. What they're actually responding to is your refusal to compress yourself back into the old shape. You didn't leave. You stopped absorbing. You might notice how subtle this pressure is. A look, a sigh, a reminder of how things have always been. None of it sounds dramatic, but all of it carries weight. This is the seal attempting to reseal itself through familiarity. It doesn't demand obedience. It invites it gently. And that gentleness is what makes it tempting. Your steadiness here matters more than any explanation. The moment you begin defending your clarity, you step back into the role of translator. You start managing discomfort again. Instead, you learn to let discomfort exist without rescuing anyone from it, including yourself. This is not cruelty. It's respect for reality. There's a particular courage required at this stage. The courage to be misinterpreted without rushing to correct the record. You know who you are now. You know why you moved the way you did. You don't need the system's permission to remain aligned. Silence, here, becomes strength. Not the old silence of suppression, but the new silence of self-trust. You may also notice moments of unexpected connection. Someone asking a question they never asked before. Someone pausing instead of deflecting. Someone admitting confusion instead of performing certainty. These moments are small, but they matter. They are evidence that once a seal breaks, pressure finds new pathways. Truth begins to circulate in ways you can't control, but don't need to. At times, the emotional temperature rises. That doesn't mean you caused harm. It means stagnation is no longer insulating feeling. You stay grounded by remembering this. You are not responsible for how quickly others integrate awareness. You are responsible only for not retreating from your own. This is where fire reveals its deeper intelligence. It doesn't chase every shadow. It doesn't flare at every resistance. It burns steadily, creating warmth where it can and light where it's allowed. You embody that steadiness by staying regulated, consistent, and honest, without demanding change from anyone else. The family system is learning a new configuration, even if it resists acknowledging it. You are no longer the container for what couldn't be spoken. You are the reference point for what can be faced. That shift is irreversible, even if it takes time to settle. The story moves forward now into a quieter, more demanding phase. How you live after the seal is broken, day to day, choice by choice, without becoming hardened, superior, or isolated. That balance is the real work. After the seal is broken, life doesn't become lighter all at once. It becomes truer. And truth has weight. Not the crushing kind, the grounding kind. You start noticing how much energy you used to spend managing what was never meant to be managed by you. When that effort stops, there's space. Not empty space. Usable space. You may feel a new kind of fatigue at this stage. Not exhaustion from doing too much, but tiredness from standing differently. Alignment requires muscles you weren't taught to use. Boundaries engage parts of you that silence never did. This fatigue is not a sign you should return to old patterns. It's a sign your system is learning a healthier posture. You'll also notice a shift in your inner dialogue. The constant background question, "Am I doing something wrong?" starts to fade. In its place appears something steadier. "Is this honest?" That question becomes your compass. You don't measure choices by approval anymore. You measure them by integrity. That alone rewrites your daily decisions. This is where many people harden. They confuse clarity with armor. You don't. You remain permeable without becoming absorbent. You feel without fusing. You care without carrying. This balance isn't instinctive, it's practiced. And you practice it quietly in ordinary moments, not dramatic confrontations. You may notice how your presence changes the tone of rooms even when nothing is said. You don't rush to fill silence. You don't rush to smooth tension. You allow reality to speak for itself. This often invites others to slow down too. Not always, but sometimes. And sometimes is enough to change a lineage. There's also a tenderness that returns to you here. Once you're no longer bracing against inherited pressure, you reconnect with parts of yourself that were muted for survival. Joy becomes simpler. Rest feels earned instead of guilty. Curiosity reappears without needing permission. These aren't rewards, they're recoveries. You understand now that breaking the seal didn't make you special. It made you responsible. Responsible for not repeating what you can see clearly. Responsible for choosing differently even when it would be easier to comply. Responsible for modeling another way without preaching it. This responsibility doesn't isolate you, it refines you. You become selective with where you invest energy. You stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding. You stay open with those willing to engage honestly. This discernment isn't judgment. It's stewardship of your nervous system. As this phase stabilizes, something important becomes clear. The seal didn't break to create distance. It broke to restore circulation. Emotions move. Truth moves. Choice moves. Nothing is frozen in place anymore. That movement will continue whether you monitor it or not. Your task now is simpler than it looks. Remain aligned without becoming rigid. Remain open without becoming porous. Remain connected without becoming consumed. You don't have to fix the family system. You already changed it by changing how you stand inside it. The next part will bring this toward integration. How this shift becomes a quiet foundation rather than an ongoing struggle, and how the fire you carry settles into something sustainable. Integration doesn't announce itself with relief. It arrives as steadiness. One day you notice you're no longer bracing for reactions. You're no longer rehearsing explanations. You move through interactions without scanning for emotional weather. The fire you carry has stopped flickering, it has found a stable burn. This is where the work becomes subtle. The seal is already broken, but habits linger. You catch yourself reaching for old reflexes, over-explaining, softening truth, preemptively taking responsibility for others' discomfort. And then you pause. You choose differently, not with force, with awareness. That choice, repeated, is integration. You may feel a new trust in your own timing. You don't rush conversations. You don't delay decisions out of fear. You let moments unfold until they show you what they need. This patience isn't passive. It's attentive. You're no longer reacting to the past. You're responding to the present. There's also a recalibration of empathy here. You still feel deeply, but you no longer confuse empathy with obligation. You understand that feeling someone's pain doesn't require carrying it. This distinction protects your warmth. It allows you to remain kind without becoming depleted. Compassion becomes sustainable. You might notice how your boundaries stop feeling like walls and start feeling like edges. They don't block connection, they define it. People who respect edges come closer with clarity. People who don't reveal themselves quickly. Either way, information increases, and information keeps you aligned. As the fire settles, it transforms from intensity into heat. Heat warms. It doesn't scorch. It makes space habitable. You become easier to be around, not because you've shrunk, but because you're no longer compressed. Your presence doesn't manage the room. It stabilizes it. This is also where forgiveness quietly changes shape. Not forgiveness that excuses harm, and not forgiveness demanded by tradition, but forgiveness that releases you from the job of remembering everything on behalf of everyone. You don't forget. You simply stop storing pain as proof. Memory becomes wisdom instead of weight. Integration brings a strange freedom, the freedom to live your life without narrating it against your family's history. You're no longer defined in opposition to the seal. You're defined by what you build after it. Ordinary days regain color. Decisions feel clean. Rest no longer needs justification. At this stage, the family system continues adjusting on its own timeline. You don't track it. You don't monitor outcomes. You've learned that true change doesn't require supervision. It requires consistency. And you've become consistent without effort. The fire is still there. It always will be. But now it lives in the hearth, not the hallway. It serves life instead of interrupting it. This is what sustainability looks like when awareness matures. Two parts remain. One to show how this new foundation quietly shapes the future, without pressure, without prophecy. And one to close the story the way it deserves to be closed, without noise. From this steadiness, the future doesn't arrive as a challenge to overcome. It arrives as extension. What you've integrated begins to shape choices automatically, without effort or vigilance. You notice that you no longer ask, "Will this reopen old patterns?" You ask, "Does this belong to the life I'm building now?" That question is quieter, and far more decisive. You may see this first in small decisions. What you agree to, how long you stay, when you leave. You don't justify these choices to yourself anymore. You feel their rightness in your body before your mind explains them. That embodied clarity protects you from reenacting dynamics you already outgrew. The seal remains open, but it no longer demands attention. There's a subtle dignity that forms here. Not pride, self-respect. You treat your energy as finite and valuable. You stop bargaining with it. This doesn't make you distant. It makes you precise. People sense this and adjust accordingly. Some step closer with sincerity. Others drift away without conflict. Both outcomes feel natural. You might notice how the fire you carry influences future generations without you naming it. A different tone in how you respond. A different patience in how you listen. A different courage in how you say no without hostility. These behaviors transmit more effectively than explanations ever could. You don't need to tell the story for the story to work. This is where legacy quietly begins, not as memory but as practice. What you model becomes available to others when they're ready. No pressure, no agenda, just a visible alternative to compression and silence. The seal didn't break to make you a symbol. It broke so truth could move freely through time. You also notice how little resentment remains. Not because nothing hurt, but because pain is no longer organizing your identity. You don't orient around what was withheld or misunderstood. You orient around what is possible now. That shift releases a surprising amount of creative energy. Curiosity replaces vigilance. Interest replaces defense. As life unfolds, challenges still appear, but they don't feel entangled with history anymore. They are current, solvable, proportional. You meet them with the skills you've refined: clarity, boundary, patience, presence. None of this feels heroic. It feels appropriate, and appropriateness is what allows growth to last. The family story continues, but it no longer defines the frame of your days. You participate without being absorbed. You care without carrying. You remember without reliving. This balance is not fragile. It's earned. And it holds even when circumstances fluctuate. The narrative is preparing to close now, not by summarizing lessons, but by letting them stand unannounced in how you live. There's no need to tie this into meaning. Meaning has already settled into behavior. One final part remains. Not to elevate the moment, but to release it completely. Release doesn't feel like distance. It feels like permission to live forward. The work you did no longer pulls you back into review or repair. It supports you quietly, the way a strong foundation supports a house without calling attention to itself. You stop revisiting the seal because it no longer organizes your thinking. You may notice how naturally you occupy your life now. There's less inner commentary, fewer rehearsals, fewer emotional negotiations. You act, rest, speak, and choose with a kind of simplicity that once felt unreachable. This simplicity isn't naive. It's the result of complexity being resolved rather than avoided. Your relationship with your family becomes less central to your sense of self. Not colder, cleaner. You show up as who you are, not as who the system expects. You no longer try to extract understanding. You accept what's available and move on without resentment. This acceptance isn't resignation. It's accuracy. The fire that once felt intense now feels like warmth you carry everywhere. It informs your decisions without burning through you. You trust it. You don't monitor it. You let it do its work in the background while you engage fully with what's in front of you. This trust frees attention for creation rather than correction. You may see how this affects your future relationship. You recognize red flags early, but without paranoia. You recognize compatibility without fantasy. You enter connections with clarity rather than hope for repair. This doesn't make you guarded. It makes you available for relationships that don't require you to disappear to survive. There's also a quiet pride here, not ego, but acknowledgement. You did something difficult and invisible. You changed a pattern without demanding recognition. You broke a seal without breaking yourself or others. That kind of work rarely gets celebrated, but it lives in ways that echo forward. As this part settles, you realize something important. The seal breaking was not the defining event of your life. It was the turning point that allowed your life to be defined by what came next. That distinction matters. It keeps you from living backward. It keeps you oriented toward possibility rather than repair. The family story didn't end. It evolved. And you're no longer inside it as a reactive character. You're part of it as a conscious participant, able to enter, leave, and remain without losing yourself. That freedom is subtle, but it's real. The final part approaches now. Not to give closure to the past, but to affirm the future without drama. What remains is not resolution, but continuity without burden. You move forward without carrying the need to explain what changed or why it mattered. The seal did not define you, it cleared the way for you to live without distortion. That difference is quiet, but it touches everything. You no longer measure your growth against the past. You don't check your posture against old expectations. You wake up oriented toward what's real now, not what once needed managing. This is the gift that lasts. Attention freed from inheritance. Energy returned to choice. Presence reclaimed from obligation. If the family system shifts further, it does so without your supervision. If it resists, it does so without your compliance. You're not detached, you're aligned. Alignment doesn't argue. It doesn't persuade. It simply holds. And what holds invites others to adjust at their own pace. The fire that opened the seal now lives as discernment. It warms decisions before they harden. It lights rooms without demanding focus. It reminds you, gently, when something asks you to disappear again. And when it does, you step back into yourself without conflict. This is how cycles end permanently, not with confrontation, but with consistency. You might notice how ordinary your life feels now, and how extraordinary that ordinariness is. There's ease in your routines, honesty in your rest, precision in your yes, and clarity in your no. You don't feel lighter because you escaped the past. You feel lighter because you're no longer carrying what was never yours to finish. If anyone asks what you did, there's no headline. You listened. You stopped compressing truth. You stayed regulated when pressure rose. You chose integrity over familiarity. That's it. That's the work. And it's enough. The seal broke so life could move again. Life moved. And you moved with it. Nothing more is required. Nothing needs to be proven. What was locked is open, and it will not close again. Not because you guard it, but because you live beyond it. The story ends here because it no longer needs telling. What matters now is how you live, and you're already doing that.